It's Sunday, April 28th, 2013. Today's program is Jews and Baseball. The speaker is Peter Ephross, and the program is being held at Temple Bethel, Stamford, Connecticut.
Okay. Boker Tov. Good morning, everyone. My name is Elisa Kaplan, and Marcy Schoenfeld, sitting right here, and I are the programming vice presidents. And on behalf of the Jewish Historical Society, we welcome you to Jews and Baseball. We especially want to thank the Men's Club of Temple Bethel for co-sponsoring this event with us this morning. Thank you very much. And to Steve Lander for his wonderful cooperation. And I see that we have special rabbinic blessing this morning. We have Rabbi Hammerman here. Who's going to win the next Yankees game or Red Sox game?
You want me to get into that?
Forget about the Mets.
I do want to welcome you, and I think it's wonderful to have this here. We have so much going on here today that you'll be hearing a wedding. We have a 7th grade wedding happening at 10:30. We'll try not to get in your way.
They start them young at Bethel.
Yes. This is one of the first weddings of two 12-year-olds that I've done. In fact, both before their bar mitzvahs, so it's really going to be interesting. But anyway, you hear that that's what will be going on. You'll see the kids walking through. They look really cute. And it's great. It's great. We have a lot of wonderful things going on today. But thank you for bringing this here.
Thank you, Rabbi Hammerman. You're always so welcoming to the Historical Society and the community.
Can I make a quick announcement?
Sure.
You might have noticed there are baseball banks on the tables. They are yours to keep. It's courtesy of Steve. Also, if you did not get a raffle for the Mets tickets, it's for 2 tickets to be determined which game. My friend's tickets, I was just there yesterday. It's the mid-level tier, right by, still at the infield. And the best part is reserve parking. So if you didn't get a ticket, make sure you see Gail in the back. Thank you.
Okay. Today is a very special day, and for a lot of reasons. First of all, it's sunny, it looks like it's going to be warm, and it's a Jewish holiday. It's Lag BaOmer. That's why we're having the wedding. Lag BaOmer was the time when the Romans, we had Rabbi Akiva versus the Romans. It was a kind of a bad time, and there was a plague, which ended on the 33rd day of the Omer, which is today. So if we were in Israel, we'd all be at the beach. It's a day to do things outside, so that's why we planned Jews and Baseball to coincide with Lag BaOmer. We have a quick commercial announcement. We have 3 exciting things coming up, which you'll want to know about. Next week, right here at Temple Bethel at 10:30, we are showing the movie Ghetto, the Historic Ghetto of Venice. It is going to be shown on PBS sometime within the next year, but we're very lucky to have Michael Philip Davis, who is part of the production company and will be explaining the movie and answering questions about it. So you'll get a sneak preview of a movie from 30 years ago that's been re-digitalized and updated, and you'll be so smart if you come to see this movie, because you can tell people it's on PBS. On May 22nd, we have our last book talk for the year. Sandra Meltzer will be talking about Indignation by Philip Roth. Her particular interest is Philip Roth, and she's a fabulous speaker. You're all welcome on Wednesday morning, May 22nd at 10 a.m. at the JCC if you're interested in Philip Roth. June is a very big month for the Jewish Historical Society. We are so excited this year to be presenting our Heritage Award to Rabbi Mark Golub, who is the founder of the now nationwide television production Shalom TV. And he's been a rabbi in the Stamford community for 40 years. It is also going to be right here at Bethel. We're just moving in. We're just going to put cots in the back room there. Sunday, June 9th from 4 to 6 p.m. There's lots of information about that in the community, and you'll all be getting invitations. So now it's my pleasure to introduce the president of the Jewish Historical Society, Ava Weller.
Good morning, everyone. I wanted to welcome you too on behalf of the Jewish Historical Society, and also thank the Men's Club. I know they've already been thanked, but it's wonderful that you're working with us on a topic that I know everyone will really enjoy. And I also want to thank Temple Bethel as well. I especially want to thank the Jewish Historical Society VPs of Education and Programming, Marcy and Alyssa, for bringing another wonderful program to us today, and also an opportunity to attend a baseball game, so that's really special. Thank you. Did you know the Jews were here in this area since the 1600s? If you didn't, you might like to know that we have the only Jewish archives in Fairfield County, and we would welcome you to come and visit and also make donations to us. We continue to collect stories and memories about local Jewish history and through our Oral History Project, and we also are now recording Jewish war veterans with our Veterans History Project, which is connected with the National Archives. So if you know of someone that you think would be a good candidate to be interviewed, or you yourself would like to be interviewed, please come and give us your name and we can follow up with you. There will be a new display at the JCC in our display case and at the library, which we have at the JCC, on Shalom TV. And Alyssa has already mentioned that we have our Heritage Award, and the fact that it went national this year is huge. The idea was developed here by Rabbi Mark Golub in Stamford, and to go nationally, I think, really brings a lot, not only to him, but to our area and being innovators here in Stamford. We also want you to know that we not only have books at the library, we now have DVDs that are available for you to take out. The topics are wide-ranging, from children through adults, and we hope that you'll come and visit, maybe take out a book, look at our displays, and come in. It's at the JCC. We also would like you to know that we have help called Heritage at Home if you're interested in genealogy, and we have volunteers who are willing to help you research your family, and also find out what we have in our archives. We have monthly stimulating programs on many aspects of Jewish culture. The programs are free and open to the public, and we have monthly book talks, which have been announced. Also, I don't know how many are members here? Quite a few, and some who are not. So please know that we welcome members, and we also welcome volunteers in all our areas. And if you'd like to be on our mailing list, please make sure that you sign in the back. And also, if you give us your email, we can make sure that we get our announcements through email as well. So I hope you'll consider joining us. And with that, I'll turn it back to Alyssa, who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Ava. If you have a birthday in April or May, I'd like for you to please stand. And I'd like for Steve Trell to please come forward, because today is his actual birthday. All right. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy Happy birthday, dear Steve, May and April people. Happy birthday to you. You gotta blow it out before we set anything off. Okay, now this has to be shared with all those people standing up. Okay. How many people here are Yankees fans?
Yes.
How many people here are Mets fans? Have we left any teams out?
Brooklyn Dodgers.
The Dodgers. The Red Sox. Perhaps the Washington Senators or the Baltimore Orioles. Okay. Good. Well, we're here to talk baseball. And we have a very special guest, two very special guests this morning. One of them is the youngest person in the room. I'd like to introduce Solomon Green and his father, Ethan. And Solomon can probably tell you the stats of anybody who's playing anywhere today. So Solomon and Ethan, please stand. So later, if you have specific stat questions, I'd go to Solomon. But we're very lucky that someone in the room today has decided to talk to baseball players, listen to what they have to say, and write a book about it. Our speaker today is Peter Ephross. He was born in Chicago, Illinois, and grew up in Columbia, Maryland. Therefore, he started out as a Baltimore Orioles fan. But he lives in Brooklyn now, and with his wife and two sons, and so he switched his loyalties to the New York Mets and the Red Sox. You'll have to talk to him about that later. All right. Peter Ephross is a longtime writer, editor, and an expert on Jews and sports. But before all that, he spent a year in Israel on Kibbutz Gesher Haziv, the Bridge of Splendor. This kibbutz is in the far north of Israel, between Nahariya and the Lebanese border. There might be some interesting stories there too. He returned to the USA to attend the University of Michigan, where he earned a bachelor's degree in history of baseball. No, just kidding. Peter Ephross went on to earn a master's degree in history from Brandeis University. He has published articles in numerous venues, including Publishers Weekly, The Village Voice, and The Forward. He worked for the Jewish Telegraphic Agency News Service from 1997 to 2006. At first he was the foreign editor and then the news editor. And Peter Ephross has a Temple Bethel connection. Rabbi Michelle Dardashti was his intern, and they have reconnected this morning. Peter Ephross will share the exciting creation of his book, Jewish Major Leaguers in Their Own Words, Oral Histories of 23 Players. This book is a fascinating, action-packed celebration of all the accomplishments of Jewish baseball players, which, by the way, far exceed the numbers. His insights into the players' careers and lives, told in their own rather colorful words, highlight a few recurring themes surrounding Jews in baseball: the high holidays, racial awareness, and Jewish pride. So let's give a very warm welcome to Peter Ephross.
Can everybody hear me? Great.
No, talk into the mic, please.
Sure. Yes. That's better, right? Okay. Well, thanks, Elisa. Did I get it right? Close enough?
That's right.
And David and Marcy and everybody with the Historical Society and the Temple for having me here. I feel like I have to explain the Red Sox connection. My parents both grew up in Boston, and I went to games when I was a kid with my grandpa Al at Fenway Park, so my loyalties are there.
You're excused.
Thank you. I know you probably don't really mean that, but I'll take it anyway. So there's an old joke about Jews in sports that goes something like this. One person says to the other, I published a book about Jewish athletes. And the other replies, oh, what is it, about 5 pages long? It's not a bad joke, but when it comes to Jewish Major League Baseball players, it tells us more about our own self-perception than it does about reality. 165 Jews played Major League Baseball between the 1870s and the end of the 2010 season, including Lippman Pike, who's regarded as the first professional baseball player, and they've done pretty well. I'll fill you in with more specifics later. But most Jews, whether or not they're baseball fans, know the story of Sandy Koufax not pitching the first game of the 1965 World Series because it was Yom Kippur. What many people don't know is that Don Drysdale, who pitched that game, didn't do so well. And when the manager came to take him out, Walter Alston came to take him out, the story goes that Drysdale handed him the ball and said, Skip, I guess you wish I was Jewish too. In 1934, future Hall of Famer Hank Greenberg made a similar decision, choosing to sit out a game to observe Yom Kippur. Both Greenberg's and Koufax's decisions to not play educated Americans about Jewish life. In fact, there was even a poem published in a Detroit newspaper about Greenberg sitting out the game that included the following lines. We shall miss him out in the infield, and we shall miss him at the bat, but he's true to his religion, and we honor him for that. That's 1934. Their decisions also went a long way toward making Jews feel comfortable in America. Jews saw that Americans accepted a Jewish athlete's decision to honor his religion and realized that they too could be accepted as Americans while simultaneously remaining true to their faith. Baseball also helped Jews refute the notion that they were weak, only suited to be doctors, lawyers, and business people. To sum it up, baseball helped make Jews feel more American and helped America become more Jewish. Greenberg, who was raised in an Orthodox home but was not religious as an adult, downplayed his decision this way in an interview that's part of my book. This is Greenberg. Well, to me it was a question of two things. One was, Yom Kippur is, you know, the Day of Atonement, and you're supposed to put everything aside and just pray for the sins, atone for the sins of the year. That was one reason, and the other was respect for my parents. This is what they believed in, so naturally I would, out of respect for them, go along with not playing on Yom Kippur. But important as Greenberg and Koufax's decisions were, dilemmas of whether to play on the high holidays were tougher for other players who weren't as talented as Greenberg or Koufax. I want to focus on one of them for a minute, Jesse Levis. Levis was a backup catcher for several teams during the 1990s. He was playing for Milwaukee in 1996 when he had a game scheduled on Yom Kippur. As he puts it in the book, I didn't tell my manager, Phil Garner, hey, I can't play today, I'm Jewish. He had no idea. He just wanted to win the game like any manager. I was fasting too, and I wasn't drinking water, so I was trying to keep things together. In the 7th inning, I did get in the game. I went 0 for 3. After the game, some reporter came in the clubhouse and knew I was Jewish, somehow put it together, and he said, you played on Yom Kippur, and he started asking me questions. I was like, I'm not Sandy Koufax. I'm not at that level. I'm a major league player trying to make a living, make a career. I'm not the superstar where Koufax was, where he could walk in and say, I can't play today. After the game, Bug Selig, who was our owner in Milwaukee at the time, and is now the baseball commissioner, I guess he gave Garner some grief about it. The next morning, Garner called me and apologized for putting me in the game. It was nice that he did that. Anyway, apologized. God punished me anyway. I didn't get a hit the rest of the year. I had, I think, maybe another week to go, and I was 0 for 10 the rest of the year. God got me. Even Greenberg, exalted for his Yom Kippur observance, chose to play in Rosh Hashanah, another of Judaism's holiest days, after consulting with a rabbi. In this way, Jewish players acted like other Jewish Americans. Some U.S. Jews observe the high holidays completely, including fasting on Yom Kippur, and others like Greenberg, me, and I would guess some here today, choose a partial observance. The classic dilemma of what to do on the high holidays is just one theme that surfaces in Jewish major leaguers. I want to discuss two others: how players from various generations confronted anti-Semitism, and how mid-century players dealt with World War II service. Before I do that, though, I want to explain how I got involved with this crazy Jewish baseball project. My connection started in the summer of 2004. Then an editor at JTA, a Jewish news service, I eagerly jumped at the opportunity to cover a weekend honoring Jewish major leaguers at the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. As a lifetime fan, it was really a dream come true, especially since I'd never been to Cooperstown. Now, luckily, I've been a couple times. Plus, I was thrilled to turn a lifelong hobby of Jewish sports following into part of my job. During the weekend, I met Martin Abramowitz, the founder and president of Jewish Major Leaguers, a nonprofit organization dedicated to chronicling the ties between American Jews and baseball. Martin and Jewish Major Leaguers not only organized the event, but JML was in the midst of producing what turned out to be several baseball card sets honoring the Jewish connection to the game. That project began when Martin, himself an avid baseball card collector, was lamenting the fact that so many Jewish players didn't have a card, either because their careers were too brief or because they played before the baseball card industry took off in the early 1950s. Martin's son Jacob, then 11, asked him why he couldn't create the cards for those people. Somehow it all came together. The American Jewish Historical Society helped out, as did the Fleer Baseball Card Company. Permissions were acquired from Major League Baseball and the Major League Baseball Players Association. The Baseball Hall of Fame helped out, as did photos for the cards, which, like the ones in my book, came from the remarkable collection of George Brace, a Chicago photographer who took pictures of most of the major leaguers who played from the 1920s through the early 1990s. When Martin produced the 15,000 sets in late 2003 for the American Jewish Historical Society, he thought it'd be a one-shot deal. But the response was overwhelmingly positive. Fans wanted more. An update set covered the 2003 to 2005 seasons. The 2008 release included a subset of cards commemorating the 75th anniversary of Hank Greenberg's debut, and the 2009 set paid tribute to Jewish record holders. Martin produced an 18-card set highlighting the one and only season of the Israel Baseball League in 2007, and there was also a 2010 Deck of the Decade card set. All of these card sets are now difficult to obtain. Try eBay. There is good news, though, that there's another set coming out next year, which is in conjunction with an exhibit on Jews in baseball that's scheduled for the National American Museum of Jewish History in Philadelphia. Soon after the Hall of Fame event, Martin asked me to conduct an interview of Mickey Rutner, who in 1947 played 12 games for the Philadelphia Athletics for a proposed book. In January 2005, I traveled to Texas to interview Rutner. I thoroughly enjoyed my days down there hearing his baseball stories, which have been a basis for a novel, Man on Spikes, written by Rutner's good friend Elliot Asanoff, who's better known for writing the book 8 Men Out, that was later turned into the movie several years ago. A few years later, Martin asked me to take over the editorial reins of the book. Not knowing how much work lay ahead, I said okay. And in the summer of 2008, at another Hall of Fame event, this time honoring the 75th anniversary of Hank Greenberg's rookie year, Martin gave me a large box containing about 25 interviews. The majority were commissioned by Jewish major leaguers and conducted by journalists, scholars, and other interested parties, mostly between 2005 and 2007. Several of the other interviews were conducted in the late 1970s and early 1980s as part of an American Jewish Committee project interviewing well-known American Jews. These interviews, all but one conducted by Ellie Wogelurter, a journalist now living in Israel, give us fascinating recollections from several deceased players, including Andy Cohen, Hank Greenberg, and Cal Abrams, as well as from Al Rosen, at 89, currently the oldest living Jewish major leaguer. Journalistic prodigy Louis Jacobson conducted the remaining interviews in the late 1980s. Then a teenager, Jacobson did his work as part of a confirmation project. He's now a political reporter who specializes in fact-checking claims made by politicians. So whenever you parents or grandparents can see that an interest in Jewish athletes is good for your child's or grandchild's career aspirations. As I leafed through the interviews, it became apparent that editing them down would be my largest challenge. Some of them run more than 200 pages. Balancing the number of baseball tales with the amount of Jewish content was also difficult. Was it more important to showcase a detail about a player's minor league days, his jobs after his playing days were over, or his thoughts as a Jew about the state of Israel? I base each of these judgment calls on which experience shed more light on the player's life, as well as on the length of the interview. Most of the interviews came to me in question and answer format, which I converted into first person. As part of the book, I wanted to include a list of all the Jews who played Major League Baseball. That led to the thorny issue of who is a Jew. In other words, who qualifies as a Jewish baseball player? Luckily for me, there's a list out there compiled by a publication called the Jewish Sports Review, which employs the following definition which I adopted. An athlete is Jewish if one of his parents is Jewish, he did not practice any religion while he played, and he identified as a member of the Jewish community. These Jews included Barney Pelty, nicknamed the Yiddish Curver, who pitched in the early part of the century, and Erskine Mayer, who pitched for the 1919 Chicago White Sox teams that became infamous after several of its players accepted money from gamblers to throw that year's World Series. Luckily, there's no evidence that Mayer was involved in the scandal. Jewish pride is a theme that surfaces throughout my book. As Ron Bloomberg, all right, so he was a Yankee, makes clear, he made many New York Yankees ushers happy when he debuted for the team in 1967. Here he is. Most of them were Jewish, with names like Heimowitz or Lichstein, and 3 or 4 of them told me they never thought they would ever see a Jew play baseball in Yankee Stadium. They had tears in the eyes and they said to me, "You little Yid, you're someone I can look up to now." Like Bloomberg, most Jewish major leaguers were aware that they embodied Jewish pride. Several of them, in Jewish major leaguers, in their own words, discussed connections they made with Jewish communities in the places they played, particularly in the smaller southern cities where many minor league teams were located. Pride in being Jewish is one thing, but being actively Jewish is another, and most players in the collection, like most American Jews, weren't observant. Many were raised Orthodox. Al Schacht, for instance, says his mother wanted him to be a cantor, but none seem to have maintained this level of observance as adults. It makes sense. Eating kosher food and maintaining any sense of Shabbat would be impossible to do while pursuing a professional baseball career. Because we're talking about baseball, and baseball's nothing if not statistics, here are a few stats about Jewish major leaguers. Their collective accomplishments might surprise you. Jews who made up about 3% of the population during the 20th century in the United States, made up less than 1% of baseball players from 1871 to 2002, the latest year for which these complete figures are available. But Jewish players on the whole have fared better than average. They had hit over 2,030 homers, a bit higher number than would have been expected by their percentage of all players. Their .265 batting average is 3 percentage points higher than the overall average. And Jewish pitchers were 20 games over 500, and they threw 6 of baseball's first 230 no-hitters. That was 4 by Koufax, I think, and 2 by Ken Holtzman. With the recent influx of top-flight Jewish major leaguers, such players as Sean Green, Kevin Youkilis, Ryan Braun, and Ian Kinsler, These statistics might have even improved since 2002. In a public demonstration of their Jewishness, several of these current or recent stars played or coached for the Israeli team that narrowly missed qualifying for this year's Baseball World Classic. With all these great players and statistics, it might be time to end the self-deprecating jokes about Jews not being good athletes. Some of you might wonder why we didn't interview any of the current players for the book. The reason is that current players, for understandable reasons, aren't likely to have the time to sit down for the several hours of interviews, or the inclination to speak candidly at this point in their lives. Now, the one stat in which Jews have fallen short is stolen bases, which a total of only 995 through 2002. Fewer than Ricky Henderson stole all by himself. Apparently, Jewish players have observed the 8th commandment, thou shalt not steal. Of those 141 Jewish major leaguers as of 2002, 122 were born into families in which both parents were Jewish, and 13 had one Jewish parent. 6 players, including one featured in my book, African-American Elliot Maddox, converted to Judaism. 68 players hailed from New York and California, and the rest were born in 21 other states, as well as Russia, France, Canada, and the Dominican Republic. 10 players changed their last names, all but one of them before Hank Greenberg played. More evidence that Greenberg's decision not to play and the ensuing positive reaction were pivotal in making Jews feel more at home. The reason many early players changed their names, of course, was to sidestep anti-Semitism, which was much more a part of everyday American thought and behavior through the mid-century than it was after that. In the 1930s, Detroit radio host Father Charles Coughlin gained a national following with his anti-Semitic broadcasts. And in 1942, a study of college-bound high school students found that 45% of them would not want a Jewish roommate, the highest percentage except for the 78% who would not want a black roommate. Think about it for a minute. 45% didn't want a Jewish roommate. How times have changed. Today that might mean you could only have a single dorm room at some schools. My stepfather, who's Jewish, remembers seeing a restricted sign on hotels in the South indicating that Jews were not allowed to stay there when he traveled with his family in the late 1940s, and that his family was only allowed inside when his father showed his ring indicating that he was a member of the Masons. Even Jewish writer Stanley Frank, bragging about Jewish American athletic achievements in his 1936 book, argued that Jews were not suited to baseball because they grew up in urban environments that nurtured Jewish traits of intelligence and imagination, traits apparently not conducive to baseball because they encouraged Jewish athletes to brood over their mistakes. Anti-Semitism was also prevalent on the baseball field, as taunts about the size of a player's nose and stereotypes about Jews being cheap were common. To be fair, taunts and stereotypes about players from other backgrounds were common as well, and being Jewish could actually be a boon for a player. New York Giants manager John McGraw brought second baseman Andy Cohen into his big league club in 1926 to increase the Giants' appeal among Jewish New Yorkers. Even in the late 1960s, player Mike Epstein remembered that if we went into a restaurant, some of the players would expect that I had short arms, that I wouldn't pick up the check. Even though it wasn't true, it was just something they'd heard. In the past, anti-Semitic heckling was a factor many players faced, and here the players reacted in similar ways. They tried to ignore it, and when they couldn't, they then used their fists. Several players in the book recount their stories of responding to anti-Semitism by fighting hecklers, sometimes on the opposing bench. Al Rosen, who was an amateur boxer before turning professional baseball player, wasn't shy about fighting. Saul Rogovin, a more mild-mannered Jewish player, was on the opposing team when Rosen stood up to some anti-Semitic slurs from some of Rogovin's teammates. Here's Rogovin. So Rosen grounded out one night, and as he trotted back in front of our dugout, somebody yelled, "Well, we got you that time, you Jew bastard," or something like that. And Al was a tough guy, you know. Al was a fighter at one time. He was a club fighter. And Al stopped. He stopped in his tracks. He didn't know who it was. And I looked myself because I didn't like it. It embarrassed me. I didn't know who it was till this day, and I didn't ask. It was so unpleasant. I just kept quiet. And Al walked over to our dugout, and he said, "That son of a bee that called me that name, would he care to say that again?" And everybody was just sitting there. Rogovin reacted ambivalently. I had mixed feelings. I felt very funny because here I am, an opposing player, and I'm also a Jew, you know. I had mixed feelings. I felt good for Al. Al, give it to them. And I also felt sort of disloyal. Last spring, a drunk Detroit Tigers outfielder, Delman Young, yelled anti-Semitic epithets and attacked a group of tourists outside a Midtown Manhattan hotel in the wee hours of the morning. But Young's actions are an exception. By the 1980s and 1990s, the world had changed. For the most part, blatant anti-Semitism was no longer acceptable. Encountering ignorance among fellow players had taken on different, more introspective meaning for Adam Greenberg, whose unfortunate claim to fame is being hit in the head in his first at-bat in the major leagues, and who got a second at-bat last season with the Miami Marlins. A native of Guilford, Connecticut, I think. I interviewed him just up the road here a bit. Greenberg is again this year playing for a local team, the Bridgeport Bluefish, in his attempt to get back to the major leagues. When he was in college, there weren't so many misconceptions. It was just more questions, curiosity, Greenberg told me. And I certainly enjoy that because it challenges me. If I don't know, I better start knowing. To get back to Rogovin for a second, the ambivalence he felt about the Al Rosen incident was typical. I felt like the outsider as a Jew. I didn't feel like I was one of them, basically. Deep down inside, I never felt like I was accepted, whatever accepted was. Now, this wasn't a reaction from my teammates. This was an inward feeling, a deep gut feeling that I was a Jew, and a Jew is oppressed. Be on your guard, because basically no one likes Jews. That's the gut feeling. Get close, but not too close. Keep everyone at a distance. That was deep in my gut, and that was one of the reasons I felt like an outsider. It was a really lonely, very lonely feeling, being paranoid because you're a Jew. Some of that sentiment for Roosevelt may have stemmed from his background. The son of older immigrant parents, he admitted that he didn't want to speak Yiddish like his parents did at home. At the same time, he suffered from mental health issues. He was a narcoleptic, but because his narcolepsy wasn't diagnosed until after his playing days were over, he struggled with it in private and was nicknamed Sleeping Saul Rogovin. I'd be sitting on the bench in the summertime. It's hot to begin with, the pressures are on me, and all of a sudden I just fall asleep. Just out of a clear sky, I just fall asleep. I wasn't sleepy, but all of a sudden I'd get sleepy and close my eyes, and then I was out. And a little while later I'd come out of it. Rogovin admitted that some of his problems may have stemmed from his worry over his older parents' health, but to his teammates, sports writers, and fans, it looked like he didn't care. Which is too bad, because Rogovin had some good years, most notably in 1951, when he led the American League in earned run average. Ed Mayer, who pitched for the Cubs in 1957 and 1958, is a character of a different sort. I spoke to him to update his interview, and he seemed like a generally nice guy. He also believes in UFOs. In '55, I was playing ball in Georgia. It was a night game, and the lights are on, and I was sitting in the dugout between innings. All of a sudden, this disc slowly comes over the pitching mound. It's about 250 feet up, and round like that clock. It's spinning slowly, red, white, and blue on the sides. An oval disc, and then it stops motionless and silent. And then after 20, 30 seconds, whoosh, out of sight without a sound. And there's no question in my mind about UFOs. Racial awareness is another theme that resonates throughout my book. Most Jewish players understood some of the prejudices that black players faced, and some, like Cal Abrams, felt a special bond with their black teammates. Cal Abrams said, I associated with them because we had a rapport about being with each other. He says of his black teammates on the Dodgers, including Jackie Robinson. We'd kibitz around with each other, but I didn't go out with them. I mean, I wouldn't go into the end of town to go dancing with black people, but whenever we could, we were together, clowning around and kidding around. Cal has another recollection that demonstrates his desire to be liked by Jackie Robinson. He was playing the outfield for another team when Jackie Robinson hit a single. Here's Abrams. Well, he rounded the base as hard as he could, and I immediately, without thinking of getting an error or the responsibility of anything else, fired the ball as hard as I could at first base. Jackie dove back and got back in time. As he touched the bag, he turned around to right field, and suddenly I saw a whole mouthful of pearly white teeth. He was trying to communicate to me, I think, and because we had this little rapport going between the Jews and the blacks, he was saying, "You're a goddamn good Jew, and I respect what you just did." Several Jewish players stood up for their black teammates. Ed Mayer remembers one of these times when he was in the minor leagues. We were traveling from Montgomery through Georgia, and we stopped and everybody wanted to buy a Coke. The machine was outside of a gas station, and there was a guy on my team from San Diego, a black guy who later became a famous pitcher, Earl Wilson. So we all got off the bus to buy a Coke, and Earl goes to put his nickel in the machine, and the attendant comes out and points a gun at him and says, "No N is going to buy a Coke out of my machine." I jumped in front of him and pushed him back in the bus and bought him his Coke. For his part, Hank Greenberg offered some encouraging words to fellow pioneer Jackie Robinson. In an article written for Look magazine after his retirement, Robinson recalled an incident from his inaugural season in 1947. Greenberg was playing first base then, where Robinson was standing following a single. Robinson said, "He suddenly turned to me and said, 'A lot of people are pulling for you to make good. Don't ever forget it.' I never did." Often, however, players felt powerless to change the racial status quo, as Al Rosen explains. The black players on the team were treated shabbily, particularly at spring training time, when we traveled through the South on trains and we played in some of these southern towns. And sometimes we spent the night, and they weren't allowed to stay in the hotels. They weren't allowed to ride in the taxi cabs, and it was a horrendous experience for them. And I always felt very badly about it, and you might say, "Well, what did you do about it?" Well, there's very little that can be done in a situation like that. For Elliot Maddox, being black and Jewish became essential to his identity. Growing up in New Jersey in the 1950s, he had a Jewish Little League coach who often invited Maddox into his house. Later, a Jewish high school friend taught him a lot about Judaism. As he put it, "I started to see the parallels between Jewish society, Jewish upbringing, and Jewish history, and that of blacks, primarily blacks in this country. It was extremely similar, and then being somewhat of a historian, when I went off to college at the University of Michigan, we had hundreds of history courses to choose from, and you had a history of Islam, Buddhist history, Judaic history, Christian history. So one of the courses I took was the history of Judaism, and that's when things really got rolling." Maddox's interest in Judaism continued, and in the mid-1970s, while playing for the Yankees, there's Yankees again, he converted with a rabbi in Queens. A strong personality who once put up Black Power posters in his locker. He was worried about his mother's reaction, but he remembers her saying, "Well, at least you believe in something." In case you're wondering, Maddox said he never played on Yom Kippur, and he reportedly had a bar mitzvah at a Jewish summer camp a few years ago. Perhaps no event was more important in modern Jewish history than World War II. There are two interesting things to highlight when we think about Jewish baseball players who served in World War II. First, the players of that era who served, like all soldiers and their families, made huge sacrifices, both personally and professionally. Many players interrupted their lives and their careers, some for up to 4 seasons, to serve overseas. For most, it was a relatively easy call. Individual experiences of war, however, are complex. For some Jewish players, military service was the most important and meaningful time of their lives. Mo Berg was a good field no-hit catcher. It was often joked that he could speak several languages, but he couldn't hit in any of them. During the war, Berg, a Princeton graduate, worked in Europe as a spy for the OSS, the precursor to the CIA. Following the war, however, Berg wandered, unable to live in a permanent home or find a steady job. Hank Greenberg was initially rejected for service because of flat feet. He went back for re-examination and was accepted, becoming the first active baseball player to enlist after Pearl Harbor. After serving in an infantry unit in the United States, he re-enlisted and served in the U.S. Air Corps in the Pacific. Re-enlisting in the Air Corps kept him out of combat, but it also kept him out of baseball for a total of 3.5 seasons. For his part, Andy Cohen did his time and then was glad to get out. As he puts it, "See, I was a platoon sergeant at first, and the first 8 guys to lose their lives were in my platoon. And the fellows got to thinking, we got to get away from Sarge Cohen. First 8 guys that lost their lives were in my platoon. But how they lost their lives? 2 of them from a sickness and 4 of them from booby traps. See, our job was to defuse booby traps and stuff like that, you know. Oh yes, we lost 8 men. And by the time of the end of the war, I think we had lost a total of 12. And I had a chance to go home. Boy, I grabbed at it." Mickey Rutner didn't regret his service, but years later, he realized that it hurt his chances of playing in the major leagues and earning a good living. When I interviewed him in 2005, he contrasted his wartime service with what happened to another player, George Kell. Rutner told me that Kell never went into the service because, you know, in the Bronx, where I grew up, someone would call the draft board and say, "Mickey Rutner's playing ball and my son's in the service. Why isn't he in the service?" But in Arkansas, they didn't do that, so he didn't have to go. And he got a chance to go to the big leagues, and he did well. There wasn't much you could do. There was a war in Europe, and Germany was killing all the Jews, and I wanted to go over there and do my part. Unfortunately, after that service, I had to go back to Wilmington instead of going to Philadelphia. If I had just finished the season in Philadelphia, I could have stayed there. That's the only regret I have. It would have made quite a difference. I had to go back and play for $250 a month, while in Philadelphia you would have made $2,500 a month. Just think about those numbers, shows how times have changed with salaries. When he got back from the war, Rutner became a successful career minor leaguer who played part of that one season with Philadelphia, but he never had the type of career that Kell enjoyed. That's one of the points I'm trying to get across. Even those of us who are jaded about the big money and drugs that pervade today's sports like to make heroes out of players, whether Jewish or not in the past. And there's definitely a value to finding heroes, especially for our children, who need them to look up to idolize, and in the best cases, emulate. I hope I've made the point that Jews have a proud past and present in baseball. We can all be proud of their accomplishments, whether as players or human beings, and happy when players such as Sean Green, Gabe Kapler, and Kevin Youkilis represent Israel at an international tournament. But it's also important, I think, to look at players, whether in the past or present, as human beings who made imperfect decisions for imperfect reasons. Learning the complicated reality about Jesse Levis, Andy Cohen, and Mickey Rutner, I think, makes it easier for us to relate to them. Often, however, the information is even more confusing. What are we supposed to do with Jewish player Ryan Braun, a star for the Milwaukee Brewers, whose suspension at the end of the 2011 season for performance-enhancing drugs was overturned, but on a technicality, and who was linked to performance-enhancing drugs again earlier this year? I don't have any answers, but this kind of contradiction is what history, whether Jewish history, sports history, or personal or family history, is all about. So thanks very much for listening. Again, I'd like to thank the Historical Society in the Temple and to the Rogers Photo Archive for the use of these photos. I'm happy to take any questions. I love talking about the subject. And then afterwards, I think I'll be signing any copies of the book up front for anybody who's interested. Thanks again.
Interesting. Yeah.
Any questions? Sure.
thank you very much for your insightful, informative presentation.
Speak up, please. Louder.
Thank you very much for your insightful, informative presentation. Now, in your presentation, you made a great point of the public efforts which the Jewish player did.
I'll repeat his question once he's finished. Oh, you can do that, or I can repeat it.
What was the first question?
This way everyone can hear.
In your presentation, you made a big point, as you should, about the public deeds which the Jewish players made in order to identify being Jewish. But part of being Jewish is not only to show demonstrative facts that you are Jewish. Part of being Jewish is to show kindness, generosity, gratitude, even on a small scale. In fact, the Jews say, Judaism thought that a gift given anonymously is worth so much more than a gift given publicly. So, did you try to gather any information about the empathy, compassion, generosity of the players, of the Jewish players, which were not so much public, but in their relation man to man, human beings?
It's a good question, but one that's hard to answer. I mean, several of the players, whether in the past or currently, have set up, foundations that they use to help their fellow players. So I guess that's the only answer that I can give to you, is that several of them do charitable work. For the Jewish value of tzedakah. Although to be fair, non-Jewish players do that as well. So I don't have any evidence that these players are any kinder or embody those Jewish values in their lives more than the other players. Although we would hope so. Yeah.
I lived in Brooklyn, New York, and one of my neighbors' relative was Sid Gordon, who played for the New York Giants.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you have any information about him.
Unfortunately, I don't have anything about Sid Gordon. He wasn't one of the people. He wasn't one of the people interviewed in the book. Where in Brooklyn were you?
East Flatbush.
Okay, I just came up from Park Slope today, so just on the other side of the park. But yeah, Sid Gordon was also, again, a pretty good player. There was a nice heyday back in the 40s and 50s, maybe late 30s, starting with kind of Greenberg and Harry Danning, and continuing through Sid Gordon and Goody Rosen and a couple others. So that was a nice heyday. Probably the last heyday that we had until the current one. But yeah, I don't have anything. But thanks for bringing him up. Yeah, in the back.
Do you have anything on the history of Connie Mack and the Philadelphia Athletics? He was known as an anti-Semite of the first order.
The only story that I have. Okay, the question was about Connie Mack, that he was known as an anti-Semite. I don't have anything particular about him. I don't know yes or no. Although I do know that he was known for being quite tight-fisted. In fact, the story that a couple players talk about in the book is that when they would negotiate a contract with him, that he would feign a heart attack every time. And apparently he seemed to have almost daily heart attacks, even though he lived to a very ripe old age, if I'm not mistaken. And that the players would always feel bad that he was ill. And that was one of his negotiating tactics. But if he was an anti-Semite, as we all know, he wasn't the only one back then. There's actually an article, and I don't like to throw out the anti-Semitic label at people, especially those who have passed away, but there is an article out that I've read about Leo DeRocher, who was a longtime manager, who last managed for not last, but one of his managerial jobs was with the Cubs in the 60s. And he apparently didn't get along with Ken Holtzman very well for that reason, because of his anti-Semitism. Yeah?
Did you ever run across a comment about Ralph Branca? I remember a number of years ago, we were told that Ralph Branca we knew he wasn't Jewish because we knew his mother. But I was thinking, what kind of apparently was he married to a Jewish woman or something?
That's a good question. There was an article in the article was about Ralph Branca, who was if I'm not mistaken, relief pitcher for the Dodgers, right?
No.
He was a starter.
Started.
I always make a mistake. He was in relief when they hit the home run. That's why I made the mistake, right? The famous Bobby Thompson, the famous Bobby Thompson home run. That's why I made the relief pitcher mistake. And also related in some way to Bobby Valentine, right? By marriage. His daughter is married to Bobby Valentine, who's a local guy, right?
Yeah.
Bobby Valentine's right around who has restaurants here, right?
And Ralph Branca lives in Rye.
Okay, so there was a story, and I'll have to look it up. If you give me information, I can get back to you. There was a story in the Times a few years ago discovering Branca's some Jewish heritage to Branca, right? That's what you're referring to. On which side?
His mother.
His mother. So you're saying his mother wasn't Jewish, though?
Well, I remember his mother, I remember his aunt. They were,
Right. So I think it might have been like his mother's, maybe his mother's mother, or his actual mother was Jewish.
His mother was Jewish, but she started practicing Catholicism.
Right. Right. So, yeah, it gets tricky when you start counting. Right. You want to include him because he would be considered a Jew by the anti-Semites. But if his mother considered herself not Jewish, once you start the who is a Jew question can get very sticky with a lot of players. But yeah, so that's the Ralph Branca story. Sure.
I've heard recently, in the last 15, 20 years, a lot of Jewish players have been subject to proselytizing. Particularly, Gabe Kapler has mentioned that Chad Curtis, when he was in Texas, did a lot of that and made him feel very uncomfortable. Was there a lot of that, did you find in your research, a lot of that 50, 60 years ago, or do you think that's a relatively new phenomenon that Jewish players are dealing with?
That's a good question. I happen to think actually that's more of a new phenomenon. I think 50 or 60 years ago, it was more the case of, we don't want to, you're a Jew, we don't want to talk to you. Now it's more the case that not all, but some of the Christians, and there was a case in, I think it was down in Washington with Ryan Church a few years ago, who later played briefly for the Mets, where he made a comment about, I think, Jews going to hell or something. That's what he had learned, or his girlfriend told him that. And there is a lot more proselytizing and evangelical work in the clubhouse today than I think there was back then. Back then, I think it was just kind of crude anti-Semitism, but it's kind of morphed into that these days. It's a good point.
Do you cover Moberg's war service about them taking pictures of Japan?
That's not in my book because the question is about Moberg. There is a very good book called The Catcher Was a Spy that covers that in detail. Yeah, I mean, he's a very interesting character because he was a hero during the war. And, he wasn't a great player, but he was in the major leagues, I think, for about a dozen years. And he had some sort of, I don't know if it was just an illness that surfaced or he had a breakdown, because it was a good 20 or 30 years after the war where he would live in hotels with his brother or his sister, but he never had his own permanent place. But yeah, I mean, the story of him being a hero is a fascinating one, right? He toured Japan with a baseball team, right? They went over to Japan and he took photos that were later used. Yeah, in the back.
A name in baseball, Jews in baseball, the voice of baseball, Mel Allen.
Yeah.
His family was a member of this temple and attended services here many, many years on Prospect Street.
Oh, fascinating.
I sat behind the family many times during High Holy Day services. He's another Jew that did not work on Yom Kippur.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but that wasn't his original family name, right?
Israel.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one thing I wanted to do in this book, although there are other books out there that talk about, I don't know if there's something about Mel Allen, although I'm sure he has a biography out there, that talk about, owners and commissioners and writers. And I think that's a fascinating thing. What I wanted to do in my book was really to focus on the players. Because I think there is a feeling out there that, of course we know that we're lawyers and owners and business people, but people know less about Jews as baseball players. So, yeah.
You didn't mention the second career of Al Shack.
Oh, okay.
As the crown prince of baseball.
Yeah, that is covered in the book.
Clown prince.
Yeah, so Al Shack, who I mentioned, thanks. Who I mentioned in the book, he's the one whose mother wanted him to be a cantor. After he hurt his arm, he coached for a while, and then he became kind of what was known as a baseball clown. And he used to go onto the baseball field and do a whole series of pantomime routines. And he became enormously popular. He did them at All-Star games and World Series, where he would act out little routines on the field.
Just another fact, Mel Allen was a member of this congregation.
Oh, wow. Yeah?
Do we have Rod Carew?
Good question. The answer is no. Rod Carew, who was probably one of the best hitters I knew growing up. He was one of those guys who always wanted to be in your seat when he hit because he was so good. He married a Jewish woman, raised his kids as Jewish, but never formally converted. So, you know, on the other hand, if we counted him, the overall batting average would go up. So, you know, we might want to make an exception for him. I think he's a lifetime 321 hitter, 317 hitter. So, formally on the list, he's not counted, but he's as close as you get without counting. Yeah.
Is Lou Boudreau, is he counted?
I don't want to get this wrong, so I'm gonna have to look that one up. That's gone back and forth, so I have to look that one up because he was. The story with Boudreau was that he was adopted, and I can't remember if his birth parents were Jewish or his adoptive parents were Jewish. And it gets to like the issue of with him, like what cemetery was he buried in? So at some point it gets a little, you know, you're kind of splitting hairs a little bit. And then you talk to one relative who says, oh no, he never thought of himself as Jewish. And then you talk to another relative who said, oh, but he never denounced it, and he acknowledged that part of him. So to be honest, I'll have to look in the back of the book and find out, but he's, you know, on the precipice. Yeah?
Now, when you interviewed Hank Greenberg, did you encounter a lot of anti-Semitism in his minor league and major league days?
To be honest, I didn't interview Greenberg. That interview came to me that someone else did. I just, you know, edited for the book. Greenberg generally downplayed it. He certainly acknowledged encountering some. He always said it was the similar kind of ethnicity that other players faced. And he also tried to downplay any anti-Semitism when he tried to break Babe Ruth's record. You know, there's a lot of talk that as he approached 60 home runs, that pitchers stopped throwing to him, that they would try to walk him, because they didn't want a Jew to break, you know, one of baseball's most hallowed records. But he always downplayed that and said it wasn't true. Whether or not he just wanted that to be true and he didn't want to admit it, no one's ever sure.
Any Jewish women baseball players?
Yeah, there are a couple who played in that All-American Baseball League. Tibby Eisen is one that comes to mind, and I think Anita Foss is another one. But there are books out there about those leagues, I think, that mention them as well. Yeah.
Greenberg.
I'm sorry.
What do you know about the story about the pitchers deliberately not pitching to him so he wouldn't break Babe Ruth's record?
Right. I mentioned that. So he always.
Sorry.
That's okay. He always downplayed that. You know, a lot of people have mentioned that to be true, but he himself always downplayed that and said it wasn't the case. And in fact, he feels like he got a favorable call from an umpire once that there was a home run late in the year that was foul, but the umpire called it fair. But, you know, I think it was also in Greenberg's era, you didn't want to play that up so much. You kind of, you know, as I tried to indicate in my talk, you kind of took care of it yourself. Like if someone said something, you kind of took that person. I think we live in a different era now where like it's okay to bring that up and to mention it and to address it as a society. Where in those days, especially among ball players, it was your own business. Yeah?
There were brothers from Brooklyn, the Sherry brothers, Larry and Norm Sherry. Are they in the book?
They are, yeah. And I actually... Oh, I'm sorry. There were two brothers who played for the Dodgers, Larry and Norm Sherry. Larry was this one I'm sure of, Larry was a relief pitcher. Norm was a catcher. And the story goes that Norm was the one who helped Sandy Koufax curtail his wildness. Yeah, they're in the book. And actually, Larry's passed away a few years ago, but Norm I actually did speak to for the book. Really one of the nicest guys. But yeah, the story goes that, you know, in his early years, as probably a lot of you know, Koufax couldn't throw the ball over the plate. And one day they were in a spring training game, and they didn't have a lot of pitchers. So Koufax had to go longer than you normally would in a spring training game. And after Koufax walked the first couple guys, Sherry was worried they wouldn't have enough pitchers to finish the game. And he acknowledged this is true, it's not apocryphal. He went out to Koufax and said, Sandy, throw a little bit slower. You've got to go, I don't know, whatever, 7 innings, which is a lot for a spring training game. And Koufax did, and by the next inning, by taking 3, 4, 5 miles off his pitches, he was able to throw it over the plate. And from then on, he became the Sandy Koufax that we all know.
Any other questions?
Well, again, one more. Sure.
How did the Jewish baseball players compare with their peers in terms of money?
Oh, that's a good question.
It's a Jewish question. What is it?
How did Jewish baseball players, compare to their peers in terms of the salaries? Well, as I think I mentioned, salaries were not what they were today. I mean, all salaries were lower back then. But the comparison between a player and the rest of us regular guys was a lot closer than it is today. I don't think they were treated any worse. And Hank Greenberg has a claim to being the first $100,000 player. It's disputed because some of that money was in stock options. Greenberg later became a pretty successful investment guy when he got out of baseball. And I think one of his sons is also a very successful hedge fund manager. So I think, unlike today, back then almost all the players didn't do that well.
He married well,
Greenberg, right, he married one of the Gimbel. His first wife was one of the Gimbel heirs. He then married his second wife. She wasn't as famous. But yeah, his first wife was, his first wife, they were a famous couple for a while. Yeah.
One of the things that pushed salaries up was when Drysdale and Koufax negotiated as a team.
Right, they held out that year, right?
Right.
I remember
they each wanted $100,000, which was an outrageous amount of money.
Right. Right, I mean, back then, as against, players, you were tied to a certain team. And if you didn't want to play for them, you didn't have to play, but you could never go to another team. And that changed beginning in the late 60s, and again, one of the guys, I hate to keep touting Jews did this, Jews did that, but the guy really responsible for that was the leader of the Major League Players Union, a guy named Marvin Miller, who just passed away, I think, in the last year or so. At the ripe old age of about 95 or something. And he was really responsible for organizing the players and getting them to challenge what was called the reserve clause that tied players to one team for their entire career unless they were traded.
And he never made it to the Hall of Fame.
Still hasn't.
And there's a lot of reasons for that.
Well, I think
it might include 2 things. One you just described, and one of what your book was about.
Right, although, it didn't stop Greenberg and Koufax from getting in.
No, I know, but, the owners were upset because you know what happened with the Kurt flood and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And I want to ask you one more thing.
Sure.
Wasn't Koufax adopted?
Someone else wants to answer.
Actually, his birth father's name is Braun.
Right,
he
that's
took
right.
the name Koufax from his stepfather because he felt, he was a little boy, but that's
right. Thank you. Oh yeah, so the question was about Sandy Koufax being adopted, and I was reminded that his birth name was Braun, and then he took his stepfather's name.
He actually went to the University of Cincinnati on a
Basketball
basketball scholarship, not baseball.
Right, another Brooklyn boy, finished Lafayette High, went over to the University of Cincinnati on a basketball.
Best friends with Mr. Met.
Right, Mr. Fred Wilpon, the owner of the Mets, and he are buddies.
They all played baseball together in
Lafayette.
All right.
One last question.
Are you going to write a book about Jews and basketball?
I wouldn't mind it. I'm not sure. I have 2 small boys at home, so I don't know if my wife would like it so much. But, there actually is a film. There's a documentary about Jews and basketball, which is also a very fascinating history.
We're showing your NFL sign.
Oh, you're showing
The First Basket.
Yeah, The First Basket, right, by a guy named David Viors.
And Dolph Shays' daughter lives in town.
Wow.
And he comes.
That's incredible. Yeah, because that's a fascinating history also. The first basket of what was the precursor to the NBA was scored by a Jewish guy playing for the Knicks.
Ozzie Sheck. Lives in Rockland County.
I think he lived.
He lives in Rockland County. He's still alive.
He's still alive?
93 years old.
All right. Well, thanks again.
Isn't Peter Ephross terrific?
so you can sign the books.
Right, and Peter's not going anywhere, so please stay around. I'm sure you'll be willing to talk to people, sign books, hear your stories, your reactions. Wow. Okay, and now we're going to have a very special drawing for the raffle. I'm going to ask Keith Friedman, the head of the Temple Bethel Men's Club, to come forward. And while he's walking up, I have a special commercial announcement that if you'd like to see this program again, or any of the other programs for the Jewish Historical Society, they are at the Harry Rosenbaum Judaica Library at the JCC. We have copies of all of our programs, so you're welcome to review anything you've liked or something you want to catch up on. Men's Club for co-sponsoring this morning, Keith.
You're welcome, thank you for coming. But truthfully, we did nothing. I was just asked to show up.
Most men are asked to just show up.
Are all the tickets start with 730, so I can just do 188. 730-188.
Really?
All right.
Have a good time.
Well, thank you everyone for coming to 730-188. The winner was right over here on my right.